All right, we have a few more people in the waiting room. Once we get everybody in, we'll get started.
And the pool table downstairs.
None of these are in here. What's the new mileage? 625.
Okay, well, you did have this one.
Well, then I'll go check one.
Just double check.
Okay.
Okay.
Will you say?
All right, welcome everyone. Good morning and thank you for being here today. Just some really quick housekeeping things before we get started. This presentation has just as many people registered as there was yesterday. So we have a really big group of people here today. So when not speaking, not asking questions or getting clarification, I'm going to ask that you guys stay muted just so that everyone can hear. Additionally, the presentation should go about an hour and a half. In the last 30 minutes I've allocated for Q&A. During this time, I would very much like to have a meaningful dialogue, answer any questions you may have, discuss scenarios that you may be experiencing. I do ask, though, because there are several different agencies represented today, that we be sure that when we ask those questions, we're being mindful of the people we support and keeping their information private. So we want to be sure that we ask those questions in a way that someone else is not going to be able to identify who you are talking about. We are recording this again, and I have two screens, so I keep looking back and forth. I promise I'm not ignoring any of you. I just want to make sure I get everybody in who's in the waiting room. So my name is Stacy Ward. I'm the Director of Family Support for the Prader-Willi Syndrome Association USA. I want to tell you just a little bit about myself and how it applies to this presentation specifically. So prior to coming to work for PWSA USA, I led both the clinical and the residential teams for an agency in upstate New York. My title changed several times over the 18 years that I was there. That agency specialized in supporting individuals with Prader-Willi syndrome, both residentially and in the community. So we focused on adults in our residential program, and in the community, we provided care management, or at the time it was called service coordination, respite, community hub, and then also did some very specific school training around Prader-Willi syndrome and how those with Prader-Willi syndrome have unique learning needs that need to be included in an IEP, modifications, accommodations, that sort of thing. While I worked there, I had the most amazing fortune of working alongside some of the world's leading PWS specific providers. Now, having said that, they were fantastic. They were amazing people. But I learned the absolute most about supporting individuals with Prader-Willi syndrome from individuals living with Prader-Willi syndrome. Please do not discount all that you can learn from the people that you're working with. What I have to say today is a great baseline of information, but you are going to learn so much more from the people that you're supporting. So I also have a master's degree in psychology and applied behavior analysis. I am currently pursuing my licensure as a BCBA. However, this presentation is not a specific ABA presentation. I will offer some suggestions and some approaches that may fall under ABA, but it's really a positive behavior supports approach. And today, what I'm hoping we're going to learn, or you're going to walk away having learned, is a working definition of what is behavior. How do we define behavior? The importance of communication, managing expectations, both yours and the people you support, the value of routines, structure, your role in creating positive behavioral outcomes, the benefit of planning. I cannot stress that enough. And then after we talk about all of the things that look like behavior and all the challenges you might face, we're going to spend some time talking about how you should manage them or what has been helpful. We're also going to talk specifically about how anxiety and sensory needs will affect the behavior of individuals with Prader-Willi syndrome. So what is behavior? Behavior is defined as anything that a living organism does. So you're engaging in behavior right now. I'm engaging in behavior. I'm talking. That's a behavior. I'm moving my hands. That's a behavior. I'm admitting people into the presentation. Those are all behaviors. Every single living person engages in behavior. Technically, behavior is not good or bad. It just is. For the purposes of this presentation, though, we are going to use words like good and challenging and maladaptive, because I think that's how people learn best. So when we talk about good behavior, actually, we don't talk about it, right? We don't talk about good behavior because it doesn't cause a problem. We don't even acknowledge when good behavior is happening most of the time. However, when that behavior that somebody's engaging in becomes a problem, it's often labeled bad, maladaptive, challenging. And the goal is to either change that behavior or in some cases, change that person. And I want to talk a lot about that and what that really means. So as I mentioned, people with PWS are not the only ones who engage in challenging or unsafe behaviors either. We all do this. So picture for a moment that COVID never happened. Everybody works in an office and you're driving to work and you're going to be about 10 minutes late. You have a meeting with your boss the second you walk through that door. You're driving, you know you're going to be late, and the car in front of you is going about 10 miles below the speed limit, and you can't switch lanes because there's a car there. How do you respond in that moment? Do you tailgate them? Do you beep your horn? Do you flash your lights? Do you scream in your car knowing that they can't hear you? If any of those actions were done by somebody you were supporting, whether they have PWS or not, you would look at those behaviors as challenging or maladaptive behaviors. But when we engage in them ourselves, we justify them. We're running late. We're frustrated. The person is going below the speed limit. And all of that is absolutely true. But my point here is we view the behavior of those people we support differently than we view our own behavior. And quite frankly, we shouldn't. I apologize. There's some more people in the waiting room. I want to get them in. So behavior is very often a means of communication. For example, in that scenario where you're driving, if you're beeping your horn, you're communicating to that person, move over. I don't want to be late, speed up. When a person you support engages in a meltdown or a maladaptive behavior, they could be communicating to you, they're frustrated, they're tired, they're overwhelmed. They don't want to stop the activity they're doing to move on to a request that you have just placed on them or a demand. So when you're faced with those situations, what I want you to do first, the first thing I want you to think about is, what are they trying to tell me? Be curious for a second, rather than think this person isn't listening to me. This person is having a challenging moment because they're trying to tell you something, and perhaps they don't have any other way to articulate it. So it comes out as behavior. Be curious. Doing this helps us all in a couple of ways. So first, It helps us not take this behavior so personally. And, you know, it's human nature to take some of these things personally. Very rarely is it about you. It is about the environment. So it will help you separate so that you can handle the situation, you can provide the support in a much more objective way. Additionally, it takes you from your own frustration and problems to a problem-solving perspective. So why are they doing this? Not what are they doing? So I want you to look at this slide for a second. What you see is just the tip of the iceberg, and we're going to talk about this pretty in depth throughout this presentation. But by utilizing positive behavior supports and the tools that come along with positive behavior supports, we're able to proactively and hopefully preventively address some of these things that are below the surface. Positive behavior support has been proven to decrease tantruming, diminish perseverative OCD-like behaviors, increase cooperation and effective transitions. So we talked a little bit about this yesterday, and it's going to be in kind of each of the presentations throughout the week, but individuals with PWS very often have a hard time transitioning from one activity to the next, from one setting to the next. In some cases in the school system, from one academic subject to the next. Engaging in positive behavioral support strategies will help that. And there's lots of different ones. I'm just going to give you a couple of examples that you can utilize and have put into a behavior plan if appropriate. Now, these are not approaches that will work for everyone, but you could use a token economy. We see very often in an intensive setting, such as an inpatient PWS setting or a school setting, token economies can be very effective. Individuals earn a certain number of tokens for completing tasks or not engaging in specific things. And then those tokens get cashed in for something that's meaningful for them. You'll often hear in a school setting, somebody say, you know, today I'm working for a 15-minute break. And that's part of the token economy. There's also points and level systems. And I see these used most readily around levels of independence. So the level of supervision a person may need. Whatever strategy you're using, whatever behavioral mechanism, it is crucial that your documentation is crystal clear. And we're going to talk about that in just a couple minutes. So back to the iceberg. So what you see is just the tip of the iceberg. Everything else are these private events. They're the things that you can't really see. Fear, anxiety, irritation, feeling overwhelmed, anger, sensory overload. Now, you don't actually see those things. What you see is how a person responds. The behavior you're seeing is a reaction to those emotions. So for those of you who were with us yesterday, you already know that hypothalamic dysfunction causes emotional dysregulation. And there is some anecdotal research that shows that within the different subtypes, there's different behavioral presentations. So those with the deletion type, quick refresher, this is when they receive both a 15th chromosome from mom and one from dad, and the portion of the gene, the 15q13 gene that they receive on the 15th chromosome from dad is missing. So those with that subtype very often engage in skin picking more frequently. One of the strengths that they have is they have an ability to match emotions with the people that they're engaged with. Now, this can be a fantastic strategy for you to implement. If they're going to match your emotion, chill out, be very calm, disengaged. But if you start to get a little bit anxious yourself, and then your voice becomes a little bit faster when you're talking, your body language becomes tenser, your facial expressions demonstrate that maybe you're not real comfortable in this situation, they're going to match those same emotions. Now, very often they can't tell you that that's what's happening. So this is one of those strengths that you want to use for good. You want to build it into your own toolkit, your repertoire of skills to help somebody with PWS manage all of their emotions and therefore the behaviors that you're going to see. Now, those with the UPD, the uniparental disomy, so that's that the situation where they receive 2 15 chromosomes, both from mom and none from dad. And then the imprinting falls into this category as well for the behaviors we're going to talk about. And the imprinting is they receive both, one from mom, one from dad, but that same area that's deleted in deletion is present but inactive in the imprinting. People who have that type of PWS have more autism spectrum disorder symptoms or characteristics. There's a lot of people who will say that the majority of people with PWS also have autism. That's actually not true. The research shows that it's about 30%. Now, what I will say is there's characteristics that are very similar to autism, but the presentation, the reason for having those symptoms comes from a different place. In the vast majority of this country, you cannot get certain services without an autism diagnosis. So there are many people who have the dual diagnosis on paper in order to get services, but the research does not show that they truly meet the criteria for autism. That same group of people, those with the UPD and the imprinting, may also have an increased risk for psychiatric comorbidities. So you may see people with a diagnosis of bipolar disorder. That happens pretty regularly. A labile diagnosis, anxiety, depression, all of those, fairly common diagnoses, but bipolar is the one that we see a lot in those with UPD and imprinting. The other thing to keep in mind is that those with this subset of diagnoses often have more obsessive tendencies. They may hoard more frequently. They may be more engaged in rituals. So hoarding is when they, we're not talking the shows, the hoarders in most cases, although that can happen if not managed well. But typically it's hoarding things like baby dolls or pencils or crossword puzzle books. Usually it's not multiple things, it's one thing or two things. So if you ever, want to do some nerdy reading just for fun, Maya Bialik, who is, for those of you who don't know, she was Blossom and she played Amy Farrah Fowler on The Big Bang Theory, did her dissertation on obsessive compulsive behaviors in Prader-Willi syndrome. And you can find it online if you ever want to read the 300 pages. It's actually a very, very good read. She published that in 2007. And from there, we've had some other studies done based on some of the research and information that she had posted. So let's talk about anxiety for a minute. I can't stress this enough. Anxiety is not a behavior. Please, when you're creating behavior plans or you're presented with a behavior plan that somebody is giving you to help support somebody, anxiety should not be listed as the target behavior. Anxiety is an emotion that results from observable and measurable behaviors. So my slide here says that most individuals with PWS have high levels of anxiety at their baseline. But I don't think that's accurate. I personally do not know a single person with PWS who does not have a high level of anxiety as their baseline. This is one of the very, very few times that I will say, I truly believe that it is all people with PWS. And I don't like to use words like all, always, never. No one. I think that, you know, when using those types of words, we forget that people are individuals. But I do think in this situation, everyone with PWS has a high level of anxiety at their baseline. So let me try to put this into perspective of what that baseline would look like. So imagine that you've never spoken publicly before. Excuse me, I'm sorry, letting some people in. So you've never spoken publicly before. And now you're being asked to speak about the Mars space station at a banquet hall full of astrophysicists. Would you be anxious? I know I sure as heck would be. So that immediate sense of butterflies in my stomach, my body gets tense thinking about doing something like that. This is the baseline of anxiety that people with PWS are living with every day. It's amazing that they can actually get out of bed and function feeling that way. Many of us wouldn't be able to. So let's talk a little bit about the things that you see when someone is feeling anxious. What are those observable and measurable things? Perseveration. For those of you who don't know, perseveration is often seen as repeatedly asking the same question over and over again. Is dinner at 5 o'clock? Is John making dinner? Is John going to make dinner? Will John be back from his appointment with Susie in order to make dinner? That's perseveration. Can you see how that can be measured versus anxiety can't? We can measure how many times did they ask? Was it, and that's count, did they ask 10 times in 3 minutes? Did they ask from the time John left to go to the appointment until the time he returned from the appointment? That's observable and measurable. Anxiety is not. Skin picking. So we know that lots of people skin pick or bite their nails when they're nervous. It's something that's pretty common in the general population, not just the PWS population. Aggression. So we all know what this looks like. We know when somebody says, you know, being aggressive, we get a picture in our mind. This is one of those behaviors that is so critical to operationally define for the staff who are going to be intervening. So the picture I just got in my head may be different than the picture that you just got. So is it throwing things? Is it hitting somebody? Is it biting somebody? Is it tipping over the table? What does aggression look like? And without defining it, you won't be able to effectively manage it. Defiance. Forgive me, but this is one of my least favorite words. It's right up there with non-compliance. Most people say non-compliance or somebody is being defiant when they're not doing what they're being told. And although that's technically true, I want you to think about these words for a second. Think back to that definition of behavior. Is it observable? Is it measurable? Is it something that any organism is doing? So if I'm being defiant and I'm just sitting here, are we sure that I'm being defiant? Maybe I didn't hear what was being asked. Maybe I am ignoring rather than being defiant. And then non-compliance, when we're talking with or about adults, this is one of the things that really upsets me. You or I, as adults, can make any decision we want. We can make bad choices. We can put ourselves in risky situations and live with those consequences. People with developmental and intellectual disabilities very often are not allowed to take those risks, but when they want to, it gets classified as non-compliance. So when we're talking about people with PWS, I want you to really think about what's happening before we start using those words. I see it most often, and this would be in my own program, so I am not throwing shade at anyone. I would hear my staff say, they're being non-compliant today. And I said, well, tell me what that means. Well, I asked them to vacuum and they didn't. Like, you asked them to vacuum and they didn't, so that's non-compliance. But tell me, if you go home from work and you don't feel like vacuuming right now and you just want to sit for 5 minutes, are you allowed to? The answer for all of us is yes. So again, we're holding people that we support to a different standard than we hold ourselves. So I get off my soapbox about that. Thank you for indulging me. Just keep in mind when you're using those words in behavior plans. Elopement. So we all know that this is running away. Now, this is probably the riskiest behavior that people with Prader-Willi syndrome engage in. And very often the risk comes from the hyperphagia piece, so that they run away to address that drive for food and put themselves in situations that can be incredibly risky that they can't make informed decisions about. So several years ago, there was a young woman who eloped from her residential program in Minnesota. It was winter, and she was found 12 hours later, frozen to death next to a dumpster at a restaurant. The risks and the consequences for elopement are much, much more severe than some of the other behaviors that you may see people engage in. The last example of this I want to share is, and this unfortunately is something that's fairly common, whether they're eloping from a group home or their living environment with their families or leaving school. People will elope and then trade themselves. They'll trade sex for food. And all of the risks that come with that, we don't need to go into a lot of details, but this is one that's also very, very common and just detrimental to people's lives. So putting some good safety plans in place around elopement, if that is a behavior that the people you support engage in, is super important. Meltdowns. This is something that's pretty fairly common and often referred to as a PWS meltdown or a PWS shutdown. You may see this wording used in support chats, listservs, or when talking with families. But what that looks like truly is different from person to person with PWS. But some of the most common behaviors we see people engage in during a meltdown is crying, yelling, very often using some sort of profanity, occasionally becoming aggressive with all of those things like hitting or spitting and all of those different things that could fall under aggression. And then it ends with sitting down and not engaging, not moving and not engaging. So I'm going to share a story, intense meltdown I was ever involved in. I was working with a young lady who, it was the first day that she was moving in to our group home. And, she was young. At the time, she was actually a child. So it was the only program that the agency I worked with had a children's program. And since the individuals who we opened that program with have grown and are all adults now, and it functions as an adult program. But the day that she moved in was pretty traumatic for her. And unfortunately, she needed to have an invasive medical procedure done on the first day of moving in. So picture that heightened anxiety. It's there as her baseline. She's moving in to a new situation with staff she's never met, roommates she's never met. Her anxiety increases. And then she has to have an invasive medical procedure, and it increases this much higher. And now mom comes to the appointment and she thinks she's going to go home with mom rather than go home with me. And when that didn't happen, she was distraught. And we went through the whole gamut. We had the perseveration. Can I please go with mom? I want to go with mom. Why am I not going with mom? It's not fair that I can't go with mom. And then she was skin picking. As she was saying this, she actually pulled off her fingernails during the course of this. we got a little aggressive. We tore all the signs that are in doctor's offices. We tore all them off the walls. We tipped over a chair. Nothing truly dangerous in those moments. But we did all of that. We finally get outside and she is trying to chase mom down the road as mom is driving away. And I'm physically intervening by blocking her. Eventually, she sits down in the parking lot and that's it. She won't look at me. She won't engage in any sort of dialogue. And now we're stuck. We're in the shutdown phase of this meltdown. So picture you and me for a second. Are you worried about safety? You're sitting in the middle of a parking lot. Are you embarrassed? All of these other parents are thinking that you're kidnapping her or, trying to prevent her from leaving with her mom. Are you worried about what your boss is thinking? Why is this appointment taking so long? Are you thinking about every single intervention and prevention strategy that you may have learned in whatever that course is that you take in your agency? For me personally, the answer was yes to every one of these things. I want you to know that that is so completely normal. It is absolutely normal to feel all of those things. And let yourself feel them, but don't show them. So you're going to feel all that on the inside, but this is where it's super important to make sure that you visibly appear very calm in this situation. Like you are in complete control, and this is no big deal. Trust me, it doesn't feel that way. But in order to help that individual start to feel safe with me, I needed to be sure that she didn't think I didn't know what I was doing. So your reaction and your response is critical when somebody is in a full meltdown or shutdown mode. The first thing you want to do is make sure everyone is safe. You, the individual you're supporting, and any bystanders. So in our situation, we were now in the middle of a parking lot. So I was able to have another parent go back into the doctor's office and just ask them if they could send out some cones or somebody to come out and just cordon off an area where people could not drive while she was sitting in the middle of this parking lot. If you're in a living room, per se, you might want to move a coffee table or a chair that can be used, unfortunately, as a weapon, or if for any reason you do have to, as an absolute last resort, use some sort of physical intervention to manage the situation. Nobody's going to hit it. Nobody's going to fall on top of it. It's not going to be in your way. And then move everyone else out of the way. So ask any bystanders. In a program, it may be the other individuals who live there, or even other staff, to just back up. Now, if you're in a program, you do usually want to have some sort of witness. This is very often standard protocol for agencies, is to have somebody keeping an eye out. But what that person who is there as a witness and can tag in so you can tag out if necessary, they want to keep their distance and not appear as if they're paying attention during this time. And then, honestly, you sit and you wait it out. So for parents of children, it's a little bit different. Say this happens in the middle of a Walmart, they can pick up that child and leave. That's not something that's going to happen with adults. So you wait it out. In my situation, we waited for hours. We sat in that parking lot for 3.5 hours in the rain. And every 20 minutes or so, I would say to her, let me know when you're ready to go home and have dinner, and we'll go. Because at this point, she had missed dinner. And I knew that could be a motivator. And she's entitled to get dinner when we get home. So for lots of programs use an approach of if you miss dinner, you don't get it. For people without Prader-Willi syndrome, that is not the case for those with Prader-Willi syndrome. They may not make it back to the house for dinner for whatever behavioral reason. They are entitled to their dinner once they get there. So I would just ask, let me know when you're ready. And then I would disengage. I would look away. I would look at my phone. I'd be looking at the trees or the cars driving by, anything to give as little attention to her as I possibly could. She needed to re-regulate herself. And there was nothing I could do in that moment that was going to help her process through that. Now, you may also have situations where you perhaps can't wait it out. It's just not safe enough to do something like that. This is where you're going to call 911, or if you have a local mobile crisis unit. I'm not sure if that's something that's available to you guys in Colorado. In my particular area, it was. So we could call them. Safety always, always, always comes first. And if it is not safe, that's the phone call you're making. So as I mentioned, respond very neutrally. Give as little emotion as you can during that situation. So what I often would see, and this is with adults as well, is once they were able to regroup and re-stabilize, re-regulate their emotions, they would be very apologetic and want you to tell them you accept their apology and want to hug you. Now, some agencies have some policies around hugging. So what you're going to need to do, whatever your agency policy is. For some, you're allowed to give people a comforting hug. Do it. For those where you need to do the side hug, do that. I strongly encourage you to accept people's apologies for what they are. And you can do that as simply as saying, thank you for apologizing. I appreciate that. You don't have to say, I forgive you. You don't have to say, and you shouldn't, that their behavior was acceptable, but you do want to validate their feelings. The one thing you absolutely do not want to do is give into that tantrum or meltdown. So I understand, like I said, it can be incredibly embarrassing. Do not give in. All right, so now we are going to talk about all the things that you can do. I've told you all the horrible things that could happen, but didn't really give you any way to deal with it other than meltdown. So let's talk about this. One of the biggest additional causes of anxiety for individuals with Prader-Willi syndrome is lack of food security. So it is so important that you maintain food security. And what this means is Drs. Forrester and Gorash coined the phrase, no doubt, no hope equals no disappointment. And what that means is there is never a doubt that you are going to get all of the food, the caloric amount or the meal, whatever you were supposed to get, you're going to get all that. But there's no hope of getting extras. You're not going to get extra calories. You're not going to get unplanned treats. People are not going to be sneaking you food. And we're going to make sure that we don't accidentally leave something out that you can get. When you have that no doubt and no hope in place, hopefully you then have no disappointment, which means no anxiety around food security. You want to keep the environment around food, around meal planning, pretty non-emotional, pretty calm. It is what it is. People with PWS tend to get super excited about meal planning. You still want to keep your own emotions pretty neutral around these things. Food security also means garbage cans have lids. So people with PWS, unfortunately, will eat out of a garbage can. They may also eat things that you or I may not see as food, but represent food. So animal food, moldy food. I know of a woman who cognitively is very, very bright. She has a bachelor's degree from Hofstra University. She's able to work full-time in a child care center. Academically, cognitively, she's very bright. for her hyperphagia is off the charts. And she was found eating spoiled lunch meat out of a dumpster. And as she was doing it, she was crying and saying, I know this is wrong. I know this can make me sick. I can't not do it. I have to do it. So think of these types of situations when somebody does get into food. No, they're not making a conscious choice to do this. They can't stop themselves. It's our job as providers, as family members, to keep their environment food secure so they're not put in these situations. So, having the garbage cans on the lids on the garbage cans. If you have pets in the programs, making sure that the food is kept locked away somewhere. People can serve as food security. So if you're going into an environment where there's going to be food present, position yourself between the individual and the food. Sometimes this happens where, especially adults, maybe there's an award ceremony for Special Olympics, or they're going to a competition that they may be involved in, and there's food everywhere. I mean, the reality is there's food everywhere in our world. You go into the movie theater and they kneel the concession stand in now. You can't really get away from it. So you will serve as that food security to be sure that that person isn't able to access it. And check in with them. Somebody may really want to see this movie, but that food is causing them too much stress. They're not able to actually watch the movie and they want to leave. They're not going to offer that they want to leave. You may need to say to them, you look like this is really upsetting you. Do you want to leave? Ask them, gauge. And when you do this enough time and you spend enough time with individuals, you're going to build that trust. They're going to be able to feel comfortable enough to tell you. Consistent meal and snack schedules. So this, I think, is more important in residential settings than it necessarily is in family settings. And that's because you have multiple individuals with varying schedules and multiple staff coming in and out. So it is just easier to say snack is always at 3 p.m., dinner is always at 5:30. So it does not matter who the staff is there, who's living in that environment. Those times are consistent, and that person with Prader-Willi syndrome understands that that's non-negotiable, and it helps them feel safer. It helps keep them closer to their baseline of anxiety. So the principles of PWS behavior management, and you might hear these phrases if you attend our conferences or again, are in the Facebook pages, any of those things, but a PWS friendly environment, establishing clear boundaries, creating those clear and consistent routines and schedules, communicating the rules, and prevent, So let's talk about establishing those clear boundaries. Now, if you do this and you do it well, it's going to be one of your best toolkits. When establishing boundaries, you want to phrase everything in a positive way. So rather than say what you don't want to see, phrase things as what you do want to say. And very personally, what I'll tell you is you should avoid using phrases like we'll see or maybe, because they're ambiguous. But my own children will tell me that if my husband says we'll see or maybe, it means no. When I say we'll see or maybe, it means yes. So this ambiguity, oh my goodness. It's not clear enough for somebody with PWS. In general, people with PWS see things as black and white. It's also important that you do not lie to them or make threats. Nothing is going to ruin your relationship faster with anyone let alone somebody with Prader-Willi syndrome, than lying to them. Some examples of common lies and threats in the residential world that I sometimes say is things like, if you do that, I'm telling your mom and she's not going to take you for a home visit this weekend. Or, we can't go do that tonight. Our boss forgot to leave out the petty cash. Now, I know sometimes that can happen, and that's okay when it does happen. But don't use it as an excuse or lie about it when it doesn't happen, because I can guarantee they're going to be confronting that person for not leaving it out, and we'll find out that, in fact, they had. Say what you mean and mean what you say. So again, people with PWS think in black and white terms. So you need to be very clear in how you phrase things. They don't understand sarcasm very well, unless this is a skill that has been taught to them, actively taught. And I prefer that you guys go into a situation assuming that it hasn't, and then are pleasantly surprised if it has. And then you can, maybe joke around with people a little bit differently and maybe be a little sarcastic, but assume in the beginning that that's not something that they're going to understand. Give preferential choices whenever you can. So this may look like, do you want to vacuum the living room now or after we go for a walk? So we know that vacuuming is the chore that they have that day. It's, if you use a chore chart, it's theirs for, Tuesdays. But give them a choice when they want to do it. Or if you're able to, and in some cases you will be able to, with a menu. Do you want to have half a cup of green beans or half a cup of spinach? They're making a choice and you're okay with the outcome no matter what, but it gives them a sense of feeling a little bit in control. My favorite strategy, and in my personal opinion, the most underutilized strategy, is creating clear and consistent routines and expectations. So I'll apologize. The visual schedule that I have used here is a little bit juvenile. I had a hard time finding one that would be more appropriate for the residential setting, but you get the idea. Even though in the provider world, most of what you're doing is with adults, visual schedules can still be very, very helpful. So use them. It's not a bad thing. It may be something as simple as a planner that has the time. I wake up at 8 o'clock. I brush my teeth as soon as I get out of bed. I then have breakfast, whatever that might look like, but it's a visual tool. So individuals with PWS truly respond exceptionally well to visual schedules and structure and routines. So create a routine for your program. The structure allows them to know and feel that they are safe. I strongly recommend, and I will say, I truly understand how difficult this is, especially in the climate where every program is super short-staffed. It's very difficult to find staff right now, and I understand that. But this will pay off for you if you do it. Build some time into your routines so that each staff is able to spend some one-to-one time with each person that they support. Every shift. It does not have to be a long amount of time. It can be a 5-minute check-in. It could be reading in the newspaper together or watching their favorite show. It could be doing a puzzle. It could be playing their favorite game. But whatever it is, make sure it's something that they enjoy doing and that you just build a few minutes out of your schedule every day to do that one-to-one. This is when they are going to tell you the things that are important to them. It may be things about how they're feeling. It may be that one of their environments is not food secure. It could be something they're scared about. you're going to learn things in those one-to-one moments that are going to help you better support that person. And truly, if you're able to do this on a regular basis, the maladaptive and challenging behavior will decrease, making everybody's lives easier. It's also helpful for you if you schedule this time immediately after a less preferred activity that they have to engage in. So for the vast majority of programs that support just people with PWS, so these are residential settings that just have people with PWS, not mixed disabilities in them. Exercise is part of the normal routine. Very often it gets written into a plan as a habilitation goal. But really, most people don't love to exercise, especially when somebody's telling them to do it and they're not doing it with them. So schedule that one-to-one time as soon as they're done, so they have something to look forward to. And that one-to-one time serves as an immediate reward for completing that less preferred task. So, sounds really easy, right? But we also know routines change. And that has to happen sometimes. Sometimes there's doctor's appointments, sometimes staff calls in. There's all sorts of reasons why things might change. It's just crucial that you preset people that change has occurred when you know about it. Now, how early you preset people varies based on that person and whether or not they can handle knowing in advance. For some folks, they can't know they have a doctor's appointment until the day of, because leading up to it, they become so anxious that they then fall apart. And now it's not safe to get them to the doctor's appointment. Or some situations that are really exciting, they're going on vacation or a friend is coming to visit, whatever it might be that they get really excited about, that also for some people needs to be more of a surprise, because the excitement leading up to it will end up sabotaging the event itself. So in addition to creating structure and routines, we want to talk about expectations and rules. So it's important to develop appropriate expectations. And these rules should be consistent across everyone who lives in that program and the staff. Enforcing these consistently will provide people with a sense of security similar to that routine and structure that we talked about. Now, depending on house rule, developing house rules rather than those rules that apply to just one person is more effective. Many individuals with PWS have a strong sense of fairness and will perceive rules that apply only to them as being unfair. So you may hear, that's not fair. It's not fair that they do this. It's not fair that I can't do that. If for any reason there are rules that apply to one person, and for some people there's rules around when they can eat based on their medication, or the amount of time they can be out in the sun, that sort of thing. Explain it, be transparent about why these rules may be different. So in my experience, individuals with PWS love rules and tend to be rule followers. But the crucial piece of that, the kicker, is you have to let them think they came up with the rule. And then they buy into it. And it is fairly simple to do this. The flip side of that is not only are they going to follow it, they're going to make sure everybody else does. So when other staff aren't following it, or other individuals, you may run into situations where you have a little bit of tattling going on, and that's a different situation that you then have to deal with. I'd also like to stress that it's important that you establish a rule that someone can change the rules. So in a home situation, very often that's mom or dad is the authority figure who gets to change the rule. Identify that. That might be a site supervisor, a house manager, or the behaviorist, whatever title you may use. But you only change the rules for emergencies. So rules may have to change if there's no power. It might be Johnny's turn to pick what show we watch on Wednesday night because that's the rule, but now we have no power and he can't choose that. The rule has to change this week. So having that in place, we refer to as, the flexible brain, thinking, on the spot, but planning in advance for that is really, really helpful. Using empathy as a preventative strategy. So I think I mentioned this earlier when we were talking about saying you're sorry. You don't have to accept the behavior. You don't have to tell them that you forgive them. You want to acknowledge and validate the feeling without accepting the behavior. Empathy is not agreeing or disagreeing. It's just saying, you know what? What I hear you say is you're really sad that Johnny's leaving, and that because you're sad, you threw the layup. Sucks. It sucks that your friend is leaving. That's empathy. What you're not saying is you're sad, so it's okay to throw the lamp. Try to always look at a situation from that person's perspective. And it could be way out there. They could be telling you that the sky is not blue, but instead is yellow. You can say to them, yeah, it sounds like you think the sky is yellow. That's kind of cool. Don't get into an argument about it. Be genuine when you're empathizing with them. Please don't be fake. They're going to know it. It's going to feel terrible when you do it. The delivery is just going to be awful. Be genuine. We've all been sad. We've all been angry. We've all been anxious. We've all felt all of these different emotions. You can empathize with those. So tap into your own feelings and experiences so that when you're delivering that message, you really are being genuine. Always empathize with the person before you share your concern about what had occurred. So perhaps there was an aggressive episode, and however aggression is being defined in this moment. And we know that this individual is just angry. Empathize with that angry. Be sure that you understand and they understand that you recognize that they're angry, and it is absolutely okay to be angry. Then point out that the behavior is not okay. It's not safe, whatever the situation may be. And then make sure you tell them what you want to see in the future. So this is the time that you're going to talk about how they could have responded differently in the moment. One of the things I want you to keep in mind is regardless of the age of somebody with PWS, very often they have a hard time identifying their emotions or even the emotions of those around them. So we talked about people with the deletion type of PWS being able to match emotions. It doesn't necessarily mean that they can verbally articulate what that emotion is. So doing some practice can be really helpful. When you're watching television shows, point out, perhaps one of their favorite characters is scared. Ask them, I can't tell what that person's feeling right now. What do you think they're feeling? Or, oh my goodness, Susie's crying. Why do you think that is? What do you think she's feeling? And then have a dialogue about that. Point out your own emotions. So if you come into work and you're having a rough day, I promise you they're going to know it, unless you will have been acting your whole life and are able to really nail this down. They're going to pick up on that. They're going to feel your energy. You can tell them without telling them the reason why that you're just feeling a little sad today. You know, I'm not encouraging anybody to share their personal business with the folks you support, but making emotions and feeling them normal will help them be able to develop coping strategies for those emotions. It will help them be able to articulate the emotion that they're feeling, and then hopefully say to somebody they trust, I'm feeling really mad because XYZ, or I woke up feeling really sad because ABC. So consequences for behavior. I'm going to say this 1,000 times in my lifetime. Natural consequences work best, especially for people with PWS. But the consequences we're going to talk about are negative punishment. So that's that loss of something that's desirable. You're taking something away, and that's a punishment. So this might be in the general population. You know, I take my son's cell phone away. That's a negative punishment. A positive punishment is receiving something that's undesired. So in the case of my son, grounding him. He's now grounded. That's a positive punishment. Or adding chores to his list of things that he needs to do that he sees as a punishment. Negative reinforcement is when you're taking something away and it increases the likelihood of that positive behavior continuing to happen. So this could be something like, let me think of somebody with PWS in a situation that might happen. There was an individual that I worked with who she worked in a daycare setting, but when we found that she interacted with the children more consistently in a more positive manner when her job coach was not in the room. So we removed the job coach, and the behavior we wanted to see, which was her interacting with the children in a more positive and frequent manner, increased. That's negative reinforcement. And positive reinforcement is when you're giving somebody something and it increases the likelihood. Now, the fun thing here is people with PWS, for some reason, respond exceptionally well to positive reinforcement. That's really the case for the general population. But the form of positive reinforcement that they respond the best to is verbal praise. Telling them they've done a good job, telling them you're proud of them, giving a high five, pointing out something that they have done well. The research shows over and over and over again that this single-handedly has the largest impact on behavior for individuals with PWS. And it's so easy. So one of the most successful yet underused strategies that you can use around positive reinforcement is using that 5-to-1 ratio. And those of you who have children might have heard of this, but it's giving people 5 positive comments before you give 1 negative or critique. So you did a great job putting your shoes away today. Thank you. Walking up that hill was really challenging, and you did it today. I'm so proud of you for not quitting. Whatever it may be, but making sure that you're using the 5-to-1 ratio will make things go so well for you. We talked about some of these already, but very quickly, when somebody is having a tantrum, again, give them the space and the time that they need to de-escalate. Can you guys see the PowerPoint still?
Yes.
Okay, great. Maintain the safety. Be aware of your body language, not giving in, listening to what they're saying, and then looking bored and disinterested. And I used this picture with the magazine on purpose. So I was working with somebody who was having a rockin' tantrum one day. She just was not in a good space. And that happens, unfortunately. So she was trying to leave the apartment that she lived in. And I picked up a magazine and leaned against the door and just kept looking through the magazine. So besides making her pretty annoyed that I was not giving her the attention that she wanted, it allowed me to focus my attention somewhere else without constantly staring at her, which was my natural tendency. Aggression. We talked about all of these things already, but the one thing that I left out was not to rehash the behavior. So we don't want to continue to go back and forth with somebody about done with the situation. It's over for them. They have forgotten about it. It's not worth rehashing it, because what's going to happen is you're going to get them upset again. The skin picking. So this can happen for lots of reasons, and we talked about the reasons around anxiety, but boredom and sensory issues. So people with PWS have deficits in their sensory system. We see things like vestibular input being very helpful, whether that's swinging, rocking, jumping on a trampoline. Having a good occupational therapist on staff to evaluate somebody's sensory needs is really helpful and will hopefully decrease the skin pain. There we go. Sorry about that. For some people, the skin picking starts with a bug bite or a wound. So cover it up, put Band-Aids on it, keep nails really short. Thick lotion, fantastic help. Something that's really thick, body butter. They make all sorts of different kinds, but it can be really thick and a little bit greasy, makes it harder for people to really pick. Keeping people's hands busy. So Rubik's Cubes, fidget spinners, the pop things that are popular right now, any of those things. Avoid saying don't pick or stop picking. So we've touched on this a couple of times where we have said, don't tell them what you don't want to see, but instead tell them what you do. Hand them something to use with their hands, whether it's doing a puzzle, folding a piece of laundry, something, and say, hey, can you fold this for me? Or we need to go to Walmart and get supplies. Can you start right down the supply list for me? Just something that keeps their hands busy, but isn't saying don't pick. But you can't do both. In some cases, medication can be beneficial. There is it's called Pharmanac or N-acetylcholine. It can be effective. What we have found is if you get that prescription filled in a regular pill bottle, being exposed to the air will decrease its effectiveness. So this is one of those medications that you want to get in a blister pack. Avoid getting bug bites in the first place or sunburns, putting on things like sunscreen and bug spray and all of those types of things. Prevention is always key for everything, but we also need to be realistic that that's not always the case. I will say, so I have found for some women that getting acrylic or gel nails can help them not pick. It's harder to pick with that type of nail. However, if they are somebody who will pull off their fingernails, that's not the route to go. And when we talk about skin picking, unfortunately, this does also mean rectal picking or vaginal picking, which usually is very sensory in nature. If you're engaged or are supporting somebody who engages in that type of behavior, please reach out and we can talk very specifically about some strategies around that. The perseveration that we talked about, things that work for that. So providing reassurance and empathy, again, all of that empathy, it's so important. But one of the tools that I find really effective is saying to somebody, you know what, I'm going to answer this question 3 times. That is it. So you answer it verbally the first time. The second time, when you answer it, you say to them, no, I'm only going to answer this 1 more time. So let's write it down too. And then you write it down and give them the answer. When they come to you the 3rd time, you say to them, this is the 3rd time I'm answering this question. Not going to answer it again. And you have it written down. So I'm going to tell you the answer. Now I want you to tell me if that's the same thing that's written on the paper. And of course, it will be. When they come back and ask you for the 4th time, the only thing you say to them is, I'm not answering this question. You have the answer already. And then you disengage. Do not keep answering them. The other thing is, it's okay to say to somebody, I just need 10 minutes of quiet. I really need to focus on this, whatever it may be. I just need 10 minutes. Can you please go do X, Y, and Z for 10 minutes? What you don't want to say is, I just need 10 minutes of quiet. Don't talk to me for 10 minutes. You need to, again, tell them the behavior that you want to see. If it's appropriate, refer them back to the rules and schedules. So if the questioning is around who is the staff that is coming in, or what time are we going to do something? If you have a posted schedule, refer them back to it. A redirection can be used for just about anything. I don't find that it is as effective as these other strategies when we're talking about perseveration and those repeated questions. Do not get in a power struggle. Do not argue. First of all, you are never going to win. This is one of those things that the vast majority of people I know with Prader-Willi syndrome are very, very gifted at. And if they could perhaps pass the bar exam, would be fantastic attorneys. And maybe someday we will see that. Don't argue. There's no, just don't do it. You're not going to win. Pick and choose your battles. So do you have to argue about the color of the sky? No. Do you have to argue about whether you said this or that the day before? If it does not matter in that moment, nope, just agree. Again, use empathy. If they're trying to engage you in a power struggle, it's communication that's coming from somewhere else. So where is that somewhere? Again, get curious. What are they trying to communicate with you? Model the behavior you want to see. So are you going to feel frustrated? Absolutely. And that's okay, but don't look it. Or say, you know what, Susie, I'm getting a little frustrated. I'm not sure why you're asking me this. So let's sit down and talk about what's really bothering, and then get into it that way. Or point out the emotion that you're seeing in the power struggle. It may just be they're angry about something, or they really wanted chicken for dinner and it's fish on the menu. Point it out and talk about it. And always use the language that you want to teach them. So conflict resolution things that we all learn in the job space, use I statements rather than you statements, that sort of thing. Do that when you're also interacting with people you support. Every single one of you is going to make mistakes. We all make mistakes. Parents are going to make mistakes. The individuals you support are going to make mistakes. And it's absolutely okay. Admit it. Admit when you are wrong. It is so important that we model being humble and admitting when we've screwed up. And the types of things that I see happen in residential settings is, staff are really busy. You're in the middle of making dinner and the phone rings and meds are getting delivered at the same time. And you're the only staff there and you forget to lock the kitchen door. And somebody is able to access the kitchen and some unauthorized food. This is not a them issue. This is our fault. We screwed up. We made a mistake. It happens. But now we need to go to them and say, you know what, Bobby, I am so sorry. I was just super busy and I forgot to lock the kitchen door. And because of that, you were able to go in and get some food. And I know you didn't want to do that. And I left you feeling not safe. And I am so sorry. So I'm going to make sure that that does not happen again. Does that feel weird? Maybe a little bit for some of us who aren't used to doing that. But it's so important that we do it and that we take ownership for the mistakes that we make. So let's say we're talking about a situation where maybe we didn't know a rule and we have allowed them to maybe buy popcorn at the movies instead of bringing their own. What's going to happen in the future is they're going to think that every time they go to the movies, they're now going to be able to buy popcorn because you allow them to. So before you go the next time, you want to say, do you remember the last time I didn't know the rule and I let you buy popcorn? Well, I can't do that. And I'm so sorry, but I need to do better. And I'm going to do what's best for you. And I'm going to follow the rules because I care so much about you. So these are all phrases and language that you can use. You can also come up with your own, whatever feels most comfortable. But the point is to be specific in admitting your mistake, but also admit it, model the behavior that you want to see from them. Okay, so now we're going to open it up for Q&A. Let me stop sharing my screen. And I do apologize, my other monitor died in the middle of this presentation, so I had to switch to just this one. Does anybody have any questions? Are there things that you'd like to talk about or questions based on what we have covered so far today? No one?
Hi. Sorry.
Hi, Tana.
Hi. So I have a question. It's kind of a little specific. Just talking about the rewards for positive behaviors or behaviors that we'd like to see. So I serve an individual who has issues around complying with hygiene or showers.
Oh, yes, very common.
Okay. And this person's in a residential setting with us, but family is very involved, and family had started a reward program where if the individual showers for 4 days in a row, they receive a fast food meal, and the family sends them that fast food meal. So just using that food as a reward is what's your take on that? Or
I'm personally not a fan of it. However, I think unfortunately it works. So I would though strongly recommend, if possible, to not have them eat that fast food in the residence. So make it something that's very specific to just the family. I don't find using food as a reward to be helpful because there's never enough. So we're using it for hygiene right now, but what next? And are we teaching them that the only time that they need to, engage in particular behaviors is when they're getting that fast food or food? So for the general population, I don't like using food either. I discourage most practitioners from using any sort of edible for reinforcement. So it's not just kids with PWS that I struggle with this, but I'm really not a fan.
Okay. All right, thank you.
You're welcome. Does anyone else have any questions or scenarios that you may have come across that you'd like to talk about? Was there anything you disagreed with? You're all so quiet today.
I have another question.
Sure.
This is Donna again. Okay, so so when you talk about, I definitely agree making the consistent meal and snack settings, but again, residential settings, and this person is the only individual in the home with Prader-Willi syndrome. And so other individuals do not, even though the food is locked up, they have more access to their snacks if they ask for snacks. And the whole "this is unfair" situation is a huge one in the home. So just trying to help mitigate that, because it turns into a huge something that person focuses on completely throughout the day, of how much are they getting versus how much am I getting, and how to help him understand those differences.
This is also really common in those mixed environments. And it takes a very, very long time. And sometimes, honestly, we don't get there, but really talking about everyone, including you and me and all the other staff who work there, have different core needs, different metabolic needs. So, Johnny his body needs to have more, calories or whatever it may be for him to be healthy. Your body needs this to be healthy. So making it as black and white as you possibly can, but about health rather than he doesn't have PWS, so he's allowed to, and you do, so you can't. So taking the name of the diagnosis, because that can be pretty triggering for some individuals, well, you have PWS and they don't. Instead, talking about, some families will use the term special tummy, or, a special stomach. Some of it also is difficult, what I would experience. So the folks I supported in the residential setting, the vast majority of them were not diagnosed until they were teenagers, or in some cases older. So they had unlimited access until they got their diagnosis, and then it changed. And that was really difficult. Some of these, most individuals now are growing up in settings where it's already different, and they're used to it by the time they access residential support. I'm going to guess for this situation, that's probably not the case. And it's frustrating for them to see that other people are getting different things than they are. You can also try to do some strategic planning or scheduling around, if people have just routines around when they may go grab an extra snack, not necessarily a planned additional snack time, but can we be engaging the individual with PWS in an activity or something that they find really desirable, so they're not seeing that person go into the kitchen and get an snack.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Stacy, this is Drew. I have a question. I have a question in regards to one of the points that you made on the slides about following through or not giving in. And I know that that's dependent on the situation and what might be motivating behavior at any point in time. One thing that we discuss really frequently, and oftentimes we might give in to interfering behavior if it's potentially dangerous for the person or others around them. So the usage of extinction is something that we don't typically utilize, that we try to urge alternatives.
So I would not use extinction a lot in a residential program, but once somebody has engaged in a tantrum, depending on what they're tantruming about, I would try to refrain from giving in that moment. So you might be able to say to them at some point, once you have regained your composure, it'll be time for us to do whatever it is that they had wanted to in the first place, or we're unable to do that right now because you're not safe. But if somebody is tantruming, very often I would see tantrums around food, and we certainly wouldn't give in those situations. So it may absolutely depend on what has caused the tantrum in the first place. But what we want to avoid is them learning that by tantruming that they get whatever it is that they want, if that makes sense.
It does, thanks.
And I saw a comment in the comments. So the phrase I used earlier was no doubt, no hope equals no disappointment. Just for my own knowledge, how many of you guys work in programs where you do have a behavior intervention specialist or a BCBA, some sort of behavioral staff that's hired by the agency you're working for and not an outside consultant? You do, Drew? Great. I'm seeing this trend across the country where I'm talking with providers, and because of reimbursement rates and just the unfortunate reality of Medicaid funding right now, that agencies are not able to have behavioral staff on staff, and they're outsourcing it to an agency that may provide a BCBA to write the plan, and then the staff function as the RBT, but they're not getting the same level of oversight that perhaps they need. And in many situations, the individuals that are writing the plans haven't really spent any time with the person with PWS or been able to truly do any sort of functional assessment. So I was just curious if you guys were experiencing that. Oh, great question. Erin, I hope I'm saying that correctly.
Yes, you are. Thank you.
You're very welcome. So some of the supports that are beneficial in the employment setting and can be incredibly empowering for the person with PWS is when you ask them if they're comfortable to share their diagnosis and their support needs with their coworkers. So in my experience, when the person with PWS is able to present about PWS and how it affects them, they tend to be pretty accurate in a presentation mode. They're not always accurate when perhaps they have accessed something they shouldn't, or have perhaps not done the job in a way that we would want them to. Then it's well, I don't have that diagnosis, I don't engage in that behavior, sort of thing. But having them start with a presentation can be very, very empowering and helpful, so that all their coworkers have some empathy. In most situations, having a job coach or some sort of support staff present the whole time they're working is needed. Unfortunately, there's very few true food secure environments where people can find jobs. And the example I like to use is I was working with a young lady who had a job at the local library and was incredibly skilled at this job. She was the person who was recataloging all of the books that came in. She understood the computer system for looking up books very, very well, and was able to help the patients who came in, and just did exceptionally well, and required very little support to actually do the job she was hired for, so that we were able to keep backing out her job coach. And it was a library. She wasn't there during meals, so we didn't have to bring her snack or her lunch. We had made the wrong assumption that this was a food secure environment. But a few weeks later, we got a call from one of the librarians that the other staff were noticing that pieces of their meals would go missing. So she wasn't taking an entire lunch out of the fridge, but each day she would take one piece out of somebody different, their lunch boxes, over the course of, she worked 3 days a week, over a few weeks. And what they realized was process of elimination, that it was her. And then we had to reintroduce the job coach back in. So having somebody there, if there is any sort of food possibilities, is important. The other thing that I like teams to really think about and discuss is the risk versus benefit. So do I think the risk of getting access to food is something that should be eliminated in just about all cases? Yeah, most of the time I do, because one binge can result in death. But I also do not think that people should not be afforded opportunities that any one of us could have because of that. So finding that balance of, where that risk is and that benefit, and that, if you're able to find that somebody is able to be in a work environment for 4 or 6 hours a day, and perhaps there is a staff refrigerator, but they're not accessing it, then maybe they don't need any support around food, but perhaps they need support around particular skills. So it really does vary for most people. And it varies depending on the job. But when you can help them develop natural supports by doing things like that presentation and gaining some empathy and awareness, and having it come from them directly, it goes a long way. And I've seen people be much more successful when that happens than when there's a staff stepping in and providing that. I hope that was helpful. Did it answer all of what you were hoping for?
Yes, that was really helpful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Hi, this is Tiana again. You touched on a little bit the obsessive tendencies, or the tendency to hoard items. How do you, what kind of behavioral supports do you think have been shown to help with that?
Contracts. So depending on what they're hoarding, you may come together as a group that includes them and determine an acceptable number of whatever it is that they hoard. And in order to get a new one, they need to get rid of one of the ones that they already have, and developing a contract. So I mentioned that people with PWS tend to be rule followers. Contracts fall into the rules. So the contract says, this is what we do. And then it's easier for them to follow it. But contracts are really helpful in that contract. So, maybe the hoarding also includes their room being unsafe. It's just so messy, it's not safe. And that's the reason that we need to put contracts in place. Include pictures of what that should look like. So, you can have 15 puzzle books and then take a picture of where they're supposed to be when the room is clean. I find checklists to be really helpful as well, not just for the person with PWS, but also for the staff. So when there's things in writing, like a checklist or a contract, everybody's doing the same thing. It's black and white. It's right there. You're checking it off together, which increases the consistency. And for the person with PWS, eliminates any sort of conflict where one person is doing it, but the other person is not. Or when Sue is on shift, I don't have to do that. But when Steve is on shift, I do. So I didn't really go into this as part of the PWS personality, but people with PWS can be manipulative. They can split staff and triangulate. It can be very, very skilled in those areas. And when you put things in writing in a contract or by using checklists, it helps eliminate that from happening. They also tend to find some satisfaction in actually checking off something, because each time they check it off, you're going to jump in and say, oh my gosh, great job. You got 3 steps of this process done. I'm so proud of you. How many more can we get done today? So they're getting that positive reinforcement every step of the way, which increases them wanting to continue to do that.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you guys for being with me again today. We will be back tomorrow at 10 a.m. your time. I believe tomorrow we're talking about providing supports with dignity and respect, which can be difficult with PWS when we're talking about food. It's a tough thing. So I believe that's the topic for tomorrow. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm going to very quickly put my email in the chat. There you go. And I will see you all tomorrow. Thanks so much for being with me.
Thank you, Stacy.